My next guest has served on President Trump's personal legal team, and he's been fighting for religious freedom and the rule of law his entire career. Please welcome the Executive Director of the American Center for Law and Justice, Jordan Sekulow. Jordan, it's great to have you back here on the show. Let's start with one of the big stories of the last couple of weeks, and that's the trial of Donald Trump in New York.
Yep.
You said something that I heard very few people say. You said you would not be surprised if he was convicted. Most people were saying there's no way. The charges are flimsy. Yep. It's a ridiculous process. Right. The judge is unfair. There's nothing here.
Yeah.
But you thought this would happen.
Yes. It was New York. They put 2 attorneys on the jury, which I thought was not a good idea because they can kind of take over the jury room. And those 2 attorneys were probably, even if they were registered Republicans, they're not Trump Republicans in the city of New York and Manhattan, if that's where they're coming from. So you've got to understand that the jury that was pulled was already probably after the people that were brought forward really to just make Donald Trump look bad. You think about Stephanie Richards and this long testimony she was able to give about this relationship she had just to sully him up. And a jury that already was likely against him, it probably wasn't too difficult to get those attorneys to get the rest of the jury to say, you know what, let's convict. We don't really know what we're convicting, but we have 3 choices.
You've been practicing law a long time.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen a case where the defendant was not really told what the charges were against him until the closing arguments of the prosecution, which means the defense couldn't even rebut them?
No. I mean, and the idea that in the jury instruction, you could pick one of 3 to make it a felony, but we don't know which 3 any of the jurors pick. So we don't know if there's a conflict. So what's good about this case for President Trump is the appeal.
Yeah.
He's got a lot to appeal. And yes, he has to go through the New York appellate system. And that may be difficult, but ultimately, when you go through that system, you make your way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And at the U.S. Supreme Court, I mean, I think they're going to look at the jury instruction, those multiple ways you could, choose your felony, which is not normal. And the idea, again, that he really was not able to fight against or take on his legal team the felony charge that they brought against him.
And there are several other things about an appeal. One was that the judge refused to allow former chairman of the Federal Election Commission. Yeah. Nobody in the country is more knowledgeable about federal election law. So if you're going to hit him up for violating a federal election law, which, as you just mentioned, wasn't even kosher to what's going on, but you let it happen, then who's the best guy to rebut that but the former chairman? They wouldn't let him testify.
No, they would not.
How do they get away with that?
This is, again, it just shows you the judge in these situations. We've been cautioning people across the country. These are Soros-backed DAs, and they've had one mission the last 2 years, and we've seen it all across the country. We've seen it in Georgia. We've seen it through the federal system as well, but especially at the state system, trying to take him off the ballot, trying to, take his businesses away with the Attorney General Letitia James, and trying to ruin him financially and try and just dirty him up, knowing that he's going to be the nominee. I mean, it's all political, but these are all Soros-backed candidates.
And, I just don't understand why George Soros is so determined to destroy the American jurisprudence system, for one thing, and the entire American political system for the other.
Yeah. Well, they have launched an all-out assault legally on Donald Trump and his family. And he's probably the only person in America that I know, like I said, that could even deal with this financially, personally, and still run for president at the same time.
I totally agree. I don't think there's anybody else that would be able to get out of bed and come out of a fetal position up under the bed and face what he has to face every day. We've been talking about the New York case, but that's just one of 4 that the president is under right now, one of which has taken a very interesting turn.
Right.
That's the one in Florida.
In Florida, one of Jack Smith's 2 cases. So the one in D.C. is on hold for the Supreme Court. We should know by at least the last week of July from the Supreme Court how many of the charges might be tossed out, or that's all going to be this idea of official acts and presidential immunity, not to get too deep into it, will likely be sent back to lower courts if you heard the oral argument. And they're going to have to decide, okay, what's a presidential official act that could be criminal? And what's a non-official act that could be criminal? And then what's not covered by privilege that Jack Smith could then bring himself? So he kind of bit off more than I think he thought in that case. And by the Supreme Court taking it, I think, again, that's going to be a whole process just to answer those questions, which are not easy questions to answer, and they have not been answered before. In Florida, Judge Cannon, who they, of course, the media cannot stand on the left, has, for the first time, and by the way, Hunter Biden's attorneys have tried this. Paul Manafort's attorneys have tried this. They've tried to challenge special counsels.
Yeah.
That special counsels aren't in any statute by Congress.
Yeah.
They're created by rulemaking of the Department of Justice, and they're not confirmed by the Senate, so they're not officers of the United States. So why do they have more authority than a U.S. attorney? And are they legal? And so she has actually scheduled an oral argument. While the case on the classified documents is on hold, she's scheduled an oral argument for June 21st, and she's going to hear the issue on whether or not his appointment was legal. If she comes down and says, for the first time in court history, since this has started to be used and weaponized, which is pretty recently actually, because the independent counsel statute was let to expire after the Watergate investigation, and Kinstar. So if she, though, does say, okay, you know what, I think they're right. I think they don't have the authority to do this. She won't be the final say. It'll go to the 11th Circuit. But again, we keep talking about major cases. I know the Supreme Court didn't want to get political. That's another one that could be right on its way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And there's agreement on both sides of the aisle that this is unconstitutional, with some of the most liberal attorneys and some of the most conservative constitutional attorneys.
So this case has also taken an interesting turn, and I know we only have a few seconds, but I got to point this out. Jack Smith is going after Donald Trump because he said he mishandled documents. Yeah. Then it became clear that Jack Smith mishandled and manipulated some of the documents.
Yes, they've lost classified documents. They gave a glossary over to the defense team. So they opened the glossary up and they said, okay, so where's that document? Let's go to that document. Oh, wait, it wasn't there. This one doesn't exist. This one's out of order. So that's when she said, shh, this case is on hold.
Yeah.
You guys manipulated evidence. I mean, that's what that's called. And if you manipulate classified documents and evidence like that, you really don't have a case.
Bottom line, where does this go? Does he, I mean, right now he's gaining ground in the polls.
Right.
His fundraising is off the charts. Does it ultimately turn him into Nelson Mandela? He put him in prison, but he comes out stronger than ever?
I don't think he's going to be ever behind bars, but I do think he'll get sentenced on July 11th. He'll appeal that immediately. He'll ask for a stay on the sentence. I think he'll get that. So that'll go to the New York Appellate Division. He'll fight that one all the way. That's the one, again, with the Alvin Bragg case. And ultimately, I think what they're seeing is you can bring these cases against him, and the toughest part is the gag orders.
Yeah.
They won't lift the gag order from the Alvin Bragg case before they don't want it lifted before the first debate. How does he respond without worrying about adding up, tens of thousands of dollars in fines and maybe then almost forcing a judge's hand to jail? It's just a mess.
I think he just ought to show up in the court and say to Judge Merchan, okay, you're going to fine me for the gag order. You're going to fine me $10,000. Here's 20, keep the change.
Yeah,
I'm
right?
going to keep talking.
Exactly.
And I think that would be classic Trump for him to do that.
Yeah.
Jordan, great to have you here.
Thank you, Governor.